This is Sleeping in Trees, the audiobook. Chapter 29, Hard on Cars. As my father's namesake, I believe Lobster got an extra dollop of mulligans in life's game of golf. The best example of this phenomenon, perhaps, was the automobile. Let's make that plural, automobiles. He went through them in quantity and, on occasion, in spectacular fashion. Irresponsible behavior, boneheaded driving techniques, and roads littered with bent and broken parts were always rewarded the same way by my dad. More cars. One was a used metallic silver Mustang hardtop, automatic, circa 1966. This was a fun car, light and very fast. Lobster drove it hard, mostly with the accelerator at full stop, and went through tires faster than he did retainers for his crooked teeth or splints for his perpetually broken pinky. The Mustang met a murky and soggy end. Lobster would often spend Sundays hitching up his boat and heading out on the bay for a day of fishing, skiing, or scuba diving. Sometimes he would hustle up a couple of buddies, or preferably a girl. They usually launched at Matheson Hammock Marina, just south of Coconut Grove. The best boat trailers of the day were called float-ons. A new innovation, they were constructed of aluminum and slung low. The launcher would simply pull up to the boat ramp and back the trailer slowly into the water. Soon the boat would drift free of the submerged trailer, and the driver would simply pull away, park the car, grab the keys in the cooler, hop in the vessel, and zoom away for a day of fun and frolicking on the bay. It did not go quite so smoothly that one fateful Sunday. Lobster and his girlfriend were not on good terms that day. There had been a scene of some magnitude, and they both were in foul moods. Maybe a little boating would cheer things up. Usually, Lobster did the launch, but she insisted on driving that Sunday. As Lobster stepped out of the Mustang and walked around the front to talk her into the launch, the grouchy girlfriend popped the gear shift in reverse and hit the accelerator. With Lobster yelling and jumping up and down, she responded by screaming at the top of her lungs as she rolled slowly into the bay. Luckily, she was able to crawl out of the open window just as the silver Mustang disappeared beneath the brown water and the boat floated off towards the marina. Both she and the craft were recovered in good condition, though she was quite soaked and even grouchier. Not so the Mustang. It was in 10 feet of oily, salt water and had to be hauled out by cable and winch. The local towing company charged my dad $200 to take it away for salvage. Another victim was a tan Pontiac GTO hardtop, originally bumblebee yellow, automatic, circa 1968. The GTO in its day was one highly sought-after machine. Its V8 packed a real punch, and its hydromatic transmission pounded out gear shifts with precision. Not unlike the tragic end to the silver Mustang, the GTO was crunched up pretty good, but survived, following another tussle with the same volatile and cranky girlfriend. This one involved the alleyway behind a bar late one night and at least 2 dumpsters. Lobster was vague in his description of the event that ended up smashing the car, amazingly, on all 4 sides. Extensive bodywork and new tan paint brought the muscle car back to life. It was sold off at a later date as niggling problems began to mount. Still another was a gold SS 396 Chevy Camaro with a black vinyl roof and black Krager mags, automatic, circa 1969. This car was a lemon. After they built and sold several hundred units, the engineers realized that the motor was actually too large for the engine bay and was nearly impossible for mechanics to work on. And believe me, it needed mechanics. This vehicle was probably assembled in the same Detroit factory where beer bottles were occasionally discarded inside rear quarter panels. It seemed to be constantly out of tune. Dad concluded, after numerous trips back to the dealer, Costly Chevrolet, true name, that it was just not designed properly. The engine actually had two rear spark plugs that were inaccessible. A special tool was required, and almost no mechanic had one. Any tune-up would end up with the fouled original plugs still installed. Dad would always ask the mechanic about the two rear plugs, and inevitably be told they came right out and fresh replacements had been popped in. We knew this to be a fabrication, since none of them would order the expensive custom tool unique to this model car that one rarely saw even on the road. Finally, in frustration, Dad just fabricated his own tool, and after every tune-up, he'd replace the two plugs himself. The Prince's phone on the small yellow kitchen desk rang early on a Sunday morning. This was never a good sign. My mother always wondered immediately who was calling to report which relative had just expired. She would defer any early Sunday morning phone work to Dad. He picked up the receiver, and the caller identified himself as a Miami-Dade police officer. Dad's blood pressure spiked, and his face flushed bright red. The officer was inquiring as to the whereabouts of a 1969 Chevy Camaro, SS 396, golden color, registered in his name. Dad replied that it was right outside the family room door, parked as always when not in service. The officer persisted by asking if Dad would do a physical check while he held the line. Just a precaution, he said. Irritated, Dad laid down the phone roughly and left the kitchen, heading to the family room's exterior door. I was right on his heels. No Camaro. He walked a few steps out into the driveway and surveyed left and right to make sure it was not parked in a different spot. With a look of concern on his face, he shuffled back inside and picked up the phone. In a more sheepish and respectful tone, Dad explained to the attentive officer that, oddly, the car was indeed not where it usually was. The officer told him he was well aware of this fact because earlier that morning he himself had stood in a mucky cornfield abutting the Everglades, examining the vehicle in question. Muddy, dented, and quite inoperable, it rested across 4 rows of knee-high corn. Standing in the kitchen, watching the disturbing scene unfold, Dad's riveting stare soon centered on me. I raised my eyebrows and shrugged my shoulders, and in a halting voice pointed out that the last time I had even seen the keys to the Camaro was when Lobster picked the lock on my bedroom door the night before, around midnight, and absconded with them. I could not attest to what happened after that. Lobster was rustled out of his late Sunday morning slumber and dragged into the kitchen for an intense interrogation. His speculation began with how the car was likely stolen, joy-ridden, and dumped. Dad wasn't buying it. He knew his namesake all too well, his history with automobiles all too painfully documented. With the pressure of a persistent officer on the line, Lobster quickly folded and came clean. Going 80 miles an hour on the dark rural road, he didn't have time to react to the poorly placed stop sign, flew right up and over the drainage canal and planted the Camaro in the middle of the cornfield. The good news, he pointed out repeatedly and with enthusiasm, was that he was completely uninjured, with nary a bruise. A small miracle amongst the larger tragedy, he put forth. Dad related Lobster's unfortunate story to the officer on the other end of the line, and it was agreed that the busted-up Camaro would be towed to Costly Chevrolet, again, true name, for repair. Citations for numerous traffic violations would soon be forthcoming. In the years that followed that eventful night in a South Florida cornfield, I ended up with the opportunity to drive that same Camaro frequently as I negotiated life as a high school teenager. With regularity, at about 40 miles an hour, if I hit even the slightest rise in the road, the most horrendous shimmy would begin to vibrate up through the frame as the Camaro attempted to shake itself to pieces. The only way to stop the shimmy was to stop the car. I would report the problem to Dad. He would sigh and suggest that I would have to just make do, as it was highly unlikely that the dealer possessed the special tools required to rectify the problem. Dork and I figured out how to deploy straws in more than a few ways. None good. It's up next, Chapter 30, and it's called Red Menace.